welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to the second of our special shows marking Black History Month. This year's celebration has achieved record interest in the wake of the surge in support for Black Lives Matter. Last week, we told the remarkable story of Scotland's forgotten football hero Andrew Watson, who led his team to a devastating 6-1 triumph over England in March 1881. Andrew Watson was Scotland's first and thus far only black football captain. It was 130 years before a Scotswoman followed in his footsteps and captained her country. Ifeoma Dieke, one of Scotland's most capped players of all time, joins us from Florida to tell us of the experience of a black woman leading Scotland. And we're joined again by England great John Barnes, who places football in the context of the struggle for equality and justice. In the second half of today's show, we ask Black History 2020 editor Catherine Ross about the unprecedented publicity received by this year's programme of events, while Professor Sir Geoff argues that revisiting the often unsavoury side of history is still a positive experience. But first, your tweets, emails and messages on last week's show. First, we hear from Andrew, who says, brilliant episode of the show. Football and black history. Might not be your thing, but it was great to hear from Jed O'Brien talking up Scottish history so well. Next, we hear from Chris, who says, brilliant show, Alex. I love this story. What a remarkable and sadly forgotten figure. We should have a statue of him, that's Andrew Watson, outside Hampden as one of our original greats. So much of our history that we don't know. Thanks for telling this story so well. Scotia says, was a great show. Did we detect a lump in your throat, Alex, when describing pride in Scotland's first black national football captain? I think so. Shirley says, being a woman of a certain age and nonplussed by Fitbath Slaver, I was disappointed initially by today's topic. However, I found it very engaging and worthy. I'd heard of Andrew Watson, but was surprised by how much he'd achieved in his life against the challenging backdrop of the age. Glenn says, another note to make is a complete lack of reference to Watson's ethnicity in any of the press stories surrounding him and the team's exploits. It didn't matter. He was simply a man playing really good football. Barry says, fantastic story and one that should be taught far and wide in Scotland and beyond. The Hampden collection say, brilliant stuff. David says, very interesting and should receive wider publicity. Bobby says, finally, on my mother's side, my 5 times great-grandfather was black. He fought in the 2 major sea battles of the 18th century in the Royal Navy and served under 2 Royal Navy captains against my paternal and Highland ancestors in the 45. He's buried in Milton next to Gravesend. We are all, he says, Jock Tamson's bairns, aren't we just? In recent times, the Scotland's men's football team haven't enjoyed the same success as the team that Andrew Watson led. However, in contrast, the women's team have been rising steadily through the world rankings. A stalwart of that side winning an amazing 123 caps over 13 years was Ifeoma Dieke. She joins Alex to reflect on the significance of a black woman leading the Scotland team.
Ifeoma Dieke, amazing Scotland career, 123 caps over a 13-year period. And you saw the Scotland team, the Scotland women's team, transition from just having a handful of professional players like yourself to a very powerful squad in the world's top 20 as it is now. How satisfying was it to see that development of the side?
No, definitely. It's all about growth over the years. And from when I came in, it was me and Julie Fleeton that originally were the only ones playing professionally. And I think with, obviously, it started with Vera Powell, and then Anna continued that, like, pushing and to get, like, women's funds and pushing and pushing and pushing to make them train more, to invest more into the programme. And I think now you can see the fruition of that. Shirley Kerr's got the benefit of nearly everybody in the squad being professional. And of course, we can only get better as a nation. The more that we train, the more we're in professional environments down at Man City, down at Arsenal and clubs like that. That's obviously going to propel the national team forward, and it has done that. So, and also it gives future generations things to aspire to, because now you can go in and you can play pro.
Ifeoma, you were born in America but grew up in Cumbernauld in Scotland. But therefore, you could have played for the United States or Scotland. So what made you choose Scotland? But particularly because the United States have a pretty good side.
No, I mean, they were, and I was going into camp with them for like a week before, and I just wasn't excited. And for me, if you're going to play for a national team, yeah, I was born in America, but that's about it. I don't feel American in any way. From 3 years old to, you know, growing up in Cumbernauld and just all my roots, all my schooling being Scottish, I felt Scottish more than I felt American. So just because I was born there, there was no attachment, there was no emotional attachment for me at all. It was just all about purely playing for Scotland, representing them, and it's definitely one that I've never regretted my decision.
Now, you captained Scotland just over 130 years after Andrew Watson became the first black international footballer and led his Scotland side way back in 1881 to a memorable 6-1 triumph over England at the Oval. What do you think about that story of Andrew Watson and the efforts that are now being made to bring that figure back to the centrality of Scottish football?
Like, for me, like, I actually had no idea about it. Growing up in Scotland from I was 3 years old, playing for the Scotland team for 13 years, being in and out of Hampden and things like that. And I can't even say that I even knew the story. And, you know, because again, it's like one that came before you and knowing their story. I think it's important to carry that over. And that went over my head, and that was only brought to my attention, I think, as of last week. So as of last week, I've delved into the story. I've got to know that a little bit more. And I think that's incredible. The fact that it happened 130 years ago, but we're only finally talking about it now. It's obviously been in the dark for way too long. So I'm glad now that, more attention is being paid to it, because it was a huge achievement, and we want to obviously continue that going, continue to talk, and actually, recognising that historic achievement and what he did, and, obviously the result and everything. So that's an incredible story that needs to be, more recognition definitely needs to be given to that.
But as a girl growing up in Cumbernauld, which for our international audience is a new town just in the outskirts of Glasgow, did you, as you were playing football, did you experience any overt racism? Or when you became a professional player, did you experience it on or off the pitch?
So growing up in Cumbernauld, not too much, a little bit, but I think because in terms of my family, my brothers, because they were like older and people knew them, so then they knew like I was a girl that played football and I was like Uche's little sister. So that actually helped me, because everybody because Cumbernauld, like you said, is a small town, so everybody knows. And back then, not a lot of girls actually played football. So that helped me. But then when I go maybe somewhere else, people would just stare at you, call you the usual names and things like that. But I just didn't really let it get to me. Obviously, traveling with Scotland, I remember going to countries like Germany, Russia, Bulgaria, and things like that. And again, just comments like that, but nothing overly overbearing or horrendous like you'd see in the men's game, just because I think the audience in the female game was a lot smaller. So you didn't have the big, the microscopes my male counterparts encountered, just because the crowds were smaller. But you get little bits here and there, mainly abroad than in say Cumbernauld, because it's a small town and everybody kind of knew everybody.
Ifeoma, you're a role model for young Scottish kids, for women playing football and for black women playing football. Are people conscious of how important it is to see players like yourself so successful?
I think so. I believe so. Because if I look back in terms of, when people ask me my role models, it's you always look to the men's game, because that's who you see on TV, and you just compare yourself to them. But I think it's important for females to have role models that, are female, that look like them, so they can relate to, can see their struggles and see how they came through it, and learn from their story and how they started, how they grew up, and how they came through adversity. So it's definitely important. I take that seriously as well. So when I, in terms of giving back and going to schools and speaking to girls and coaching, my girls over here, I'm so conscious that, I know what they're going through, what lies ahead. So it's about trying to help them and navigating through the difficulties in the journey and what they've got to, what's ahead. So definitely something that, I take seriously, my responsibility seriously. And just glad that if my story can help anybody and touch anybody, then I'm happy with that.
And do you have a message for Scotland and indeed for wider field in Black History Month?
Again, it's just speaking up, and maybe when things would happen to me when I was younger, I would internalize it, I wouldn't say anything. But I think it's so important, this day and age especially, that, if you've got anything to say, you stand up, you speak up, you use your voice, and it's about helping people to educate people and for them to learn, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and no matter skin colour, we all want the same things in life, and it's about learning to, about each other.
Ifeoma Dieke, the first black woman captain of Scotland, thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Cool. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
And so from the captain of the Scotland women's football team to an England great, when I interviewed John Barnes, he had some really interesting things to say about the wider issues of racism in society. It must be difficult to be a racist when your own team's star players are black, is it not?
You have to look at the reality of racism in football, whereby I was racially abused by Liverpool fans when I played for Watford, and I'm the exact same person I came to Liverpool, and they didn't racially abuse me. So, football, particularly, up in Scotland where you know how passionate they are, regardless of whether you're a racist or not, if a player, as Mark Waters experienced up in Glasgow when he plays for Rangers, if you score goals for them, they'll love you. So, but what I do know is that had I not been a good player, and black players who go to big clubs and do well, of course, even if there are unconsciously or consciously racist people, they don't racially abuse them. But are they bad players and they play for the same club? So John Barnes going to Liverpool, terrible player, I would have got racist abuse. I know that 100% because it's not personal. It's about the perception they have of the group that you belong to and their worth in a very same way as the perception we have of women's worth and gay people's worth. So I wasn't under any illusion that they loved me because, I'm John Barnes and they love black people because they love me. Had John Barnes, because I've seen Alex Salmond, the black Everton player who got racially abused by Everton fans, and had he played well for Everton like Kevin Campbell did, they wouldn't have racially abused him. So I look at racism in football and racism in society in two different ways. The reality of racism in society, which is much more hard-hitting, much more all-encompassing, and much more serious than it is in football, but it all boils down to the fact that the perception we have of your worth. And if for the transactional benefit, if you do well for them, they will forgive you anything and love you, but that doesn't mean they're not unconsciously racist. So the Liverpool fans who love me, I say, of course you are racially biased, not towards me because you love me, but towards the average black person in the street or the average woman, and that's what we have to change.
And how much progress has been made in recent years? Let's look at football first. And how much is there still to do to stamp out racist attitudes?
Well, the progress that's made in football, two aspects of football. First of all, the game, the sport, the 90-minute match, and then the institution, which is from the hierarchy point of view, from the management point of view, administrators. Now, from the playing perspective, it's made huge strides. In fact, there are black players who are disproportionately represented in football because you have more than 20% black players and less than 10% black people in the country. And in terms of players now being paid the same amount of money, when a black player takes a shot, the goalposts aren't moved. They don't make the goals smaller. In life, a black person trying to get a job or trying to get employment or good housing or access to social care, the goalposts aren't moved for them. The goalposts aren't moved for footballers. Yes, when you every now and again on a Saturday, or if you go to Bulgaria, you will get racist abuse. But in terms of the representation of black people in football, it's disproportionate. They're completely equal. Now, from a management perspective, that's different. There are no black managers, no black administrators, no black people in the higher echelons of football, as there are no black people in higher echelons of government and other industries anyway. So why should football be any different? But why that is because sport, not just football, but sport recognize the transactional benefit of having a black athlete. From Jackie Robinson playing baseball to Muhammad Ali boxing for America in the Olympics, they recognize, and that doesn't mean they're not racially biased, they recognize the transactional benefit of having a black sportsman, which would give them gold medals, give them money because Jackie Robinson is going to hit a home run. Now, that's obvious. Usain Bolt is going to beat anybody in 100 meters. Mike Tyson is going to knock you out. However, what is the transactional benefit of having a black thinker, intelligent man who can be a football manager? Now, until we change the perception of his worth, nothing's going to change.
Coming up after the break, Alex is joined by the editor of Black History Month 2020, Catherine Ross. Join us then. Welcome back. Black History Month has been celebrated in the UK every October for more than 30 years. Despite this year's necessity of holding all the events online, they have achieved unprecedented publicity as part of the surge in support against racism in the wake of the slaying of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Alex is joined by 2020 editor of Black History Month, Catherine Ross, and Professor Sir Geoff Palmer.
Catherine, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on.
Now, you've described this month, Black History Month this year, as the biggest and best ever. I mean, it's been a huge number of events this year.
Yes, a lot of them online, though, of necessity. So that's been quite different for us all. We've missed out on the carnivals when we'd be crowds in the streets and moving around. We've missed out on, just doing general events where we'd all get together to watch films and things that are about Caribbean history or Black history generally. Yeah, we've missed the closeness of people.
And how would you respond to people who say, well, look, every month should be a Black History Month. We shouldn't feature just one single month in the year. Do you think the sort of events that we've seen and the coverage that we've seen has justified the idea of a specific month for Black history?
No, I'm really grateful, and I'm old enough to remember when it was a History Week and then it grew into a History Month. Now we're finding that a month is not long enough simply because there's so many events on. So yeah, every month it should be a Black History Month, and then everybody can get to experience all the good things that are on, from dramas and films and just social meetups to be able to talk about our history and heritage.
Now, as you've said, obviously events have forced you online in the main for the History Month this year. Do you have a highlight thus far? I mean, something unexpected that turned into a grandstand success? Have you got something you can point to which surprised even yourself, but in terms of how effective it was?
Yes, well, we've been on mainstream TV, so that was good. But the icing on the cake was when we had to do an interview for Parliament for their tours of history and heritage that's there. So we took part in that, and that was really good. There's so much actually in the building, in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, that tell our story, that I needed to highlight that so other people will do more of those tours and visits that you can have. And then also people will know that we've been here for a very long time and we have the evidence there, and we've done a lot. That's the point of my museum, is to say we have made positive contributions to the UK and have been doing that since the 1600s.
And does it assist, in your view, the self-esteem of young Black kids in particular to know the influence and contribution that figures in history have made that perhaps has been written out of conventional history?
Well, I think Black History Month also is for everyone. It's for white people. They need to know the gaps in their history and to know that we have been here for as long as we have just said that we have, and the things that we have done. But yeah, Black children especially need to know that, because when they're criticised and have negative things said about them, they can point to named individuals and say, but look what they did. And they can also feel good that if somebody could have achieved that in the times of slavery, or just post-slavery, then these young people of today will be able to make their mark too.
As editor of the Black History Month for 2020, when you were envisaging this year's programme, you must have considered the balance, on the one hand, of celebrating the achievements of Black figures through history, and on the other hand, putting a context to some of the more unsavoury parts of history. How did you reconcile that balance as you planned this year's celebration?
Well, as in all things I do, I try to point out the positive and some of the negative. So the first thing that hit us was the COVID. And for that, I was pleased to report that we were on the front line and doing great things. And we were one of those heroes that was celebrated in the national press and whatever. But then I had to point out that things like, because we haven't had good accommodation, because of the low-paid jobs we've had, we suffered disproportionately. So I've presented all that, but then I've said, and so what are we going to do going forward? So I've always left readers with something to think about, how they'll change a situation, improve or enhance, whichever aspect they're going to take away from it. everyone talks about the new normal. Well, in the new normal, I don't want to go back to being on the margins. In the new normal, I want to be able to feel more power and less of this powerlessness that I have. So I'm hoping that our Black people are feeling proud and regenerated, but I'm hoping others who are responsible for policy and legislation and so on take notice. Enough is enough. We've waited 400 years and it cannot continue. And as they can see, there are so many of us that are well talented, have the experience that we can make a difference to our country. It's ours too.
Catherine Ross, editor of Black History Month 2020. Thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much. Bye.
I'm now delighted to be joined from his home in Pennycook, near Edinburgh, by Professor Sir Geoffrey Palmer. Geoff, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
Oh, I'm delighted to be back.
And who do you think the key audience for Black History Month is? Is it for young black kids to understand some of the great figures who've not received the acknowledgement they should have in the past? Or is it for the white population to come to terms with the fact that black people have made such an important contribution to history?
I think, British history or Scottish history or Welsh history or even Irish history cannot be discussed without black involvement. And it's just because I think our historians, for whatever reason, I think, I've been very strong about this, I think for self-serving reasons. They had some mythical idea that the Scots do not want to hear about their history, especially if it's not nice. And thus they've spent a long time, these historians, manipulating Scottish history to sort of moderate the black bit. And I think this is wrong. And I've spoken, as you know, all over the country. And when I finished my lecture, the Scottish people have always said to me, why hasn't anybody told us this before? And somehow it's as if the Scottish people can't take their own history. And I think that's almost insulting.
But isn't it the case, would it be, from what you've done on the Dundas Monument, people would say, I suppose, in defence of David Hume, not just an outstanding philosopher, but a rationalist, whereas Henry Dundas was also a fearsome opponent of Scottish radicalism, as well as being involved in slavery. Wouldn't it have been more appropriate to allow the negative views expressed by Hume to be ventilated, to be put into context, to be part of the examination, without sort of saying, well, we'll get rid of his name altogether, which seems a different tactic to the one used with the Dundas Monument?
It's a salutary lesson, that in our time, that if people like, academics or politicians or whatever, if they go out their way to sort of mislead the public and turn people against other people, then Dundas to me is like Hume. His views on reason and whatever is fine, but I remember one of my colleagues once at the Heriot-Watt University trying to get my support on some issue in the university. And he said, come on, Geoff, we've got to get the spirit of enlightenment. And I said, well, during the Enlightenment, I was cutting sugarcane. So I am not impressed by the Enlightenment, because during that period, we had the most, what I would call, the most profitable evil the world has seen. Don't underestimate the systemic nature of racism. And I just feel programs like this help, because the university, they haven't done their jobs. The schools have not done their jobs. And it's probably not the school's fault. I think we need government to say to schools, get this in your curriculum. It's got to be part of the examinable curriculum, not nice to do. And I think if we can do that, we can change this awful attitude to other people, where we treat another human being as, you know, a different species. That's what Hume said. Black people are different species. That means we're like cats and dogs. And that is so untrue, because all human beings are perfectly fertile. And that's the definition of a species. And therefore, that concept of race, that, you know, one race is superior to the other, you know, we're one humanity, nothing less.
And finally, Geoff, this programme last week featured the story of Andrew Watson, the first black international football player who led his team to the Oval in London and hammered the old enemy 6-1. How do you think, if that story had been better known and better told, would it have been a role model for young black kids in Scotland to know that the most successful Scotland captain in history was black?
Well, you know, I think a lot of white Scottish people would actually admire that. You know, I think black kids would, but I really believe that in my time in Scotland, you know, a lot of Scottish people have admired my achievements, in a sense that, you know, I made a video for the Scottish government some time ago, which, you know, is called We Are Scotland. And I think a lot of black kids would admire Watson, rightly so. But I can assure you where we've got to get to is where white people admire Watson because he was Scottish. The point is that when I got my knighted some time ago, there was all these, you know, ladies in Tesco's wanting to give me hugs as part of my achievement. And they admired what I had achieved. And I don't think my colour had anything to do with it. And that's what we want. And I think Watson should be taught and should be admired by all Scots because he was playing for Scotland.
Professor Geoffrey Palmer, thank you very much indeed for joining me once again on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much, Alex. See you again.
We featured a programme on the extraordinary story of Andrew Watson as a contribution to restoring this key figure to footballing history. The fact that it was necessary is a case in point that all too often the contribution of black men and women has been downplayed or even erased from the record books. The importance is obvious. Role models of successful figures can have a great impact on how young people look at their own potential and opportunities. However, John Barnes is surely correct to argue that the task is not to think of black women and men just as role models in sport and music, but also in science, business, and even politics. And in terms of securing equality, the key audience for this appreciation is not black, but white. That hour of awareness provides the justification for Black History Month. But for now, from Alex, myself, and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we hope to see you all again next week.